don't take my word for it. Do the research. Bill, there big pharma executives are on trial in Holland right now because they are accused of deliberately manipulating the data, and that they're being accused of the fact that all the deaths during the pandemic were caused not by the illness but by the vaccine. That's a pretty.
And here's the thing. So at the end of the day, when it goes down, is that written versus oral. So people would say, "Oh, okay, well, I only trust what's written down." Well, guess what? Like I said before, things written could be manipulated.
Well, yeah, but what I just explained, I spent, I guess, 4 years talking about that. And every time I speak about it, or speak about it, I'd get removed from the internet. So, I'm not impressed by the oral versus written argument at all. So, I actually wrote down the result. I wrote 2 books about my findings about COVID and couldn't get it published. So, don't talk to me about written versus oral. That's a dead argument, in my opinion. Was there any other questions before we start on today's topic?
Okay, so I think that so we're saying, so can you help a non-believer understand what a metaphor and what's real in the Bible? Like, we don't actually drink blood, but Jonah was swallowed by a whale. Amen. Thank you. And the other person said Jonah is spit out to a group of people that worshiped a fish god, and Soul told them to fast for a month. Fasting connects with God. That's what people are saying in the audience. So,
all right, put that first question up again. Let me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, can you help a new believer understand what's metaphor and what's real in the Bible? God, these are all hour-long programs at the very least.
But when you break it down, like a lot of even with Ifa, like it's based on metaphor, but at the end of the day, like there is a lesson to be learned. So it should be pretty simple to say, okay, listen, there is like the underlying story, there is the mid story, and then there is the story that people understand from a 3rd grade level.
Right. Okay. So according to certainly the Catholic Church and most Christians, the only religious history that's true is in the Bible. Okay, so that's obviously nonsense. Every culture has their own tradition, their own history, their own connection to spirit, their own understanding of God, and they have every right to believe whatever they want and express it however they want. Ifa in particular, the first principle of good character in Ifa is make no judgment. If you want to believe that the Bible's literally true, do that. Go ahead. Who cares? But if you want to understand that the Hebrew language is like the Yoruba language, it's based on allusions and metaphors that tell something totally different. The book of Genesis looks like a story about creation. In truth, it's an explanation of alchemy. Every time in the book of Genesis where it says the words, for those with eyes to see and ears to hear, and then a word in Hebrew that seldom makes any sense, that word is a string of letters that are based on the Hebrew correlation between letters and numbers, and the number expressed in that Hebrew word is a resonance used in alchemical formulas. So if you understand alchemy, and if you understand resonance, and if you understand how to translate Hebrew letters into numbers, you can access a scientific understanding of the transformation of elements in the world that is absolutely true, that has absolutely been proven, that lots of cultures use, that you can find scientific journals to confirm, or you can simply believe that it's a literal story about creation, which it's clearly not. And that's true throughout biblical texts. If you really want to take a deep dive into this subject, know this. The original language of biblical texts was Ge'ez and Amharic. Those are the languages of Ethiopia. Ge'ez is the liturgical language of Ethiopia. Amharic is the is the conversational language of Ethiopia, and Aramaic, which is the language of Jesus, is a dialect of Amharic. So, what does all that mean? Well, if you look at the Ethiopian Bible and the concepts found in it, they are clearly precursors of the more common European biblical ideas. But the ideas related to what's called Christ consciousness in the Ethiopian Bible are between 500 and 1,000 years prior to what the Catholic Church calls the living history of the time that Jesus walked the earth. How does that happen? It doesn't. It means that the biblical story that we're familiar with was based on older sources, and then those sources were denigrated, challenged, and dismissed. It's interesting. I don't know if I'm, yeah, okay. So the guy that's making a big deal out of this is Mel Gibson. I'm not a big fan of him theologically, and I think he's got some things he needs to deal with. But having said that, he's right about his perception of the value of the Ethiopian biblical texts, of which they're the only intact versions are essentially handwritten, I believe. There might be a few published versions, but they tell an older story and a different story. And usually the older story is the closer to the truth. So it's up to you all to figure out what you want to believe. Good luck with that. I support whatever you choose. But we'll do a class on this one day, because I can go on and on, and it's not relevant to what I'm trying to talk about today here. You with me?
So I asked you all those questions because, like I said, when I talked about written versus oral,
right,
and all these different things that came up.
Yeah, no, that's fine, and I'm willing to answer them, and we can break this class into 2 sessions if we need to. But to argue that written is better than oral is just to not understand the way the brain works.
Right, because okay, let me just say this. There's a reason why I say this, right? So when you go into the Bible, right, I believe that the Bible was not meant to be read by everybody. I believe there was priests that were supposed to be interpreting the Bible, similar to what's going on in Ephah. Not necessarily the Bible, but the Torah, and that it was an oral tradition at one point that got written down, and then everybody got a hold to it, and then now it's up for interpretation by various different people. And at one point, it was just like all the religions in Africa, where it was priests that were to.
Yeah, stop. That's not true. There was never any secrets. The priests were not ever the only people that can interpret it. That is a Catholic idea that has been imposed on our faith by colonial minds trying to manipulate what we believe. When I say the oracle is read in public by 8-year-olds, how is that saying that only priests can interpret it? It's not. It's saying that it's our job as priests to explain the meaning of Odu. That's our job, not to keep it a secret, not to tell people, oh, they can't understand, not to tell people you have to be a high priest to be able to really work with this. That is all propaganda rooted in a colonialist point of view, designed to make sure that nobody learns anything, nobody becomes self-sufficient, and I would argue designed to cover up the fact that a lot of people are just making stuff up.
Oh, I'm glad that we're having this conversation. See,
that's my opinion. Not everybody's going to agree with me, and that's fine. But here's the point: the proof is in the pudding. Isn't that what your grandma said? If she was from down south, the proof is in the pudding. If you look at the metaphysical principles expressed by Odu Ifa, and if you embrace them as a way of looking at the world, does your life improve? I can say for me, I've studied Ifa, I look at the principles, I take seriously the development of Iwa Pwele. The development of Iwa Pwele has caused an expansion of my consciousness, and that's brought me great joy and inner peace. That's all I know. I don't know what God really thinks. I don't know which tradition is correct. I don't know who the historical Jesus was really. I got some ideas, but we could debate that, and who cares? The point is, what do I do? What do I need to do to improve the quality of my life? Ifa teaches that Iwa Pwele brings suru. Suru is the word for inner peace. The reason that there's so much violence in the world is people are trying to bully each other into agreeing with them because they have no sense of confidence in their own inner world. You understand? I mean, look at. Okay, so here we go. Look at the prevalence of pedophilia. I mean, that's insane. All right. So, what is pedophilia? Pedophilia, according to Wilhelm Reich, is a consequence of a person's need to control others expresses itself as sex with children. He proved that a long time ago. His one of the first books to be banned in America. His medical license was taken away from him. He was a psychiatrist for saying that. But the point is, if you look at slavery was just rooted in sexual abuse of children, men, women. And so at the end of slavery, rather than the European slave owners who were responsible for that heinous crime, they tried to justify it by maintaining white privilege. And we're now seeing the cornerstone of white privilege is the right to rape children. That doesn't even make any sense unless you see it as a psychological resistance to owning what Carl Jung called your shadow. You know, when's the last time you've had a public discussion about the depth of sexual depravity during slavery? Maybe never. And until we address that issue, it's going to manifest itself unconsciously in forms of justification. That's why the victims of sexual abuse are being demonized and the sexual abusers are being protected. There's a reason for that. There's a psychological reason for that. If you understand Ifa, the psychological reason for that is really, really clear, as is the path towards transformation, redemption, and elevation.